Hello.
Hey everyone, hello there. We see Bristol is already signed in.
Welcome to the Musical QuaranStream.
Mm-hmm.
Still going strong since like March 16th or 17th. We're still here. We're still here. I'm Bri.
And I am Glenn.
And we're your hosts this afternoon to talk about pitching Disney movie musicals. Yes. So today, well, let's recap.
Okay.
On Wednesday, I pitched doing a Descendants musical where I'd like to go with the Descendants franchise. If I were so handed the keys, you know, yes. I'm one of the top 10 players of musical screenwriting. Everybody knows me. If that happened, I'd pitch my ideas. Yeah. And today, Glenn is going to be pitching
Hocus Pocus.
Everybody's favorite.
Oh, yeah.
I think, this is the one thing that everybody really, really, really wants. I mean, I think when we originally talked about this, we talked about if there was a Disney franchise that could maybe open in the fall and then run all December and everything, because that's usually what a lot of holiday shows do. There's only The Nightmare Before Christmas, which I think it would be pretty hard to stage because there's definitely a real aesthetic with it. And it's not impossible, it's just more challenging.
Right.
And Hocus Pocus. And I think that one is a lot more fun, and I think it's a lot more suited to Broadway. And of course, since a lot of Broadway people came and did the movie, it just kind of makes sense to give it back.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about Hocus Pocus today, and how we would, what our thoughts are, my thoughts in particular, and Bri's additions to the thoughts and everything, on how you would take that and turn it into a stage show, because it's a great film.
Yes.
It's
so fun.
I remember when it first came out. I remember it didn't do that great at the box office.
Yeah.
But it turned into a real cult hit.
Yeah.
A lot of kids like our age and younger discovered the film, discovered the movie on VHS, and pulled it with them into the next.
Got something in my eye. Yeah. I'm listening though.
Yes, but they pulled it with them, and it really turned into a cult hit on the level of Rocky Horror is a cult hit, that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, and I think kids really liked it because I remember as a little kid, my sister loved The Wizard of Oz and loved being scared by the witch. So anything that kind of had witches in it, like Roald Dahl's The Witches with Angelica Houston, and then of course Hocus Pocus with other things because it was a really fun, safe thing as a little kid to be scared of. Yeah. And of course there's great musical numbers. It was funny. You know, you kind of really felt as a kid watching it that's oh, this is kind of an exciting thing, and dealing with kids' issues and kids' feelings. Not to ruin it for anybody. Spoiler alert, I'm going to give you some time. But when the cat died, I definitely remember crying as a little kid.
Yes.
I cry at everything.
Yes, but before we hop straight into it,
let's talk about what we've been doing this past
and let's talk about. Well, people know about your shirt because we discussed it.
I stole Glenn's shirt.
Yeah.
I was just like, I want to wear your shirt today. I had to go pick up some stuff, and we had to go out into the world this morning. So if you're just joining our stream, I've recently been furloughed from my job, but I got hired at another job part-time, so I had to run out to Starbucks to go get my uniform and my welcome packet and all that stuff, so I'll have some money coming in over my furlough. So I was like, I'm wearing your shirt. It's cheering me up today. Yeah. We've had rain for the past 2 weeks, and so I stole it for the stream today.
Yes, and the shirt that I'm wearing was actually a gift from Bri, and this is the Professor from Puppet History, which we've talked about before.
And this is his whenever there's technical difficulties.
Yes, this is the technical difficulties Professor that flashes up on the screen whenever they have something go horribly wrong.
Yes.
So.
And I really love it, and they actually just had a show come out on Friday that we watched, and we really liked. It's still really, really good. They only produce one a month, because it is really hard. They have to do a lot of research. It's really an educational show. I mean, they're really...
It is educational.
It is. But it's mostly humorous, and I think between the editing and the songwriting and the research for the education part, you know, it's pretty intensive. So I always understand why it's only one a month, but it still is one of my favorite things to go and watch or rewatch, even if I'm feeling a little sad.
Yeah. So it is a phenomenal show. We recommend you check it out on YouTube. Puppet History. There's 4 episodes so far.
No.
They started off with the Black Plague. Then they did the
Marie Antoinette
and the theft of the most expensive diamond necklace ever.
And then they did Miss Unsinkable with the Titanic.
Yes, one of the survivors of the Titanic who led a truly bizarre life. And their latest one is St. Vitus's Dance.
Yeah.
Which is, that's one of my favorite, like, unexplained phenomena stories.
Yeah.
So,
it's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's a little irreverent, so just kind of a heads up in case you're just like, I went to see it and I didn't like it. I mean, that's fine, but we really enjoy it. And like I said, whenever I'm feeling a little down, that's like one of the first things like I say, like, can we rewatch the Singing Diamonds or something?
Hence the gift of the T-shirt.
Yes. I also ordered a mug, but that's not here yet. So, so we really enjoy it. We're putting our money where our mouth is. Yeah. I actually wanted to like get a new shirt. This is from homage.com, HOMAGE. And this supported the Columbus Museum of Art. And they actually have one up supporting all the Columbus Metropolitan Libraries. And if you talk to us and about our time in Columbus and what we really miss, one is the Metro Parks. Those were amazing, and what I wouldn't give to like go back to High Banks Metro and just walk around. Yeah. But the other thing we really, really loved was all of the metropolitan libraries. We went to probably over half of them. Yeah. Just by virtue of where they were convenient, where they were close, or what we wanted to go and explore and see and do. And so, with the furlough, I'm not buying another shirt for a while, but I think that's what I'm going to do, kind of when I get a little bit of money again, is start supporting that cause again. So far, they've raised, I think they said $17,000. Like, it's pretty substantial. So if that's something you want to check out, the shirts are a little pricey, but the majority of the funding does go towards that effort and kind of keeping it open. I had a student who worked in the library, and they had to lay off about like half of their staff. So, knowing that we can kind of support people's jobs is really nice. Yeah. So.
I was very happy that right before we moved in here, like literally the last day we received mail in the old apartment, I received the stamps that I ordered from the Postal Service. So did my part to help out the Postal Service.
Yep. Yeah, I was like, we're kind of typical millennials, I guess, where it's like, if we have, $20 extra, which, is not very common sometimes, but what we do, we try to support other people with it by either, going to our friends' restaurants, going to our friends' stores, putting into public funds or public works. We're not really large philanthropists as I think we'd like to be. Like we always say, if we win the lottery, there's a few things that we plan to do, but one would definitely be like, giving to ASPCA, which I volunteer at, or our theaters we volunteer at. And it's kind of living the dream that you just wish that you made enough money to support the things you really enjoy. Yes. So we're definitely trying to do that. Yeah. So.
All right. So, and with all of that.
Can I add one more thing that people should go see?
Yeah.
We had some break from the National Theater, but they came back stronger than ever. And I watched a little clip. I wasn't able to watch the whole thing because I had to really grind in order to get to my furlough. But they did A Streetcar Named Desire with Gillian Anderson, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Of course, y'all are from the South. You're going to be like, that's horrible accents. British people have a hard time with Southern accents sometimes. Not everybody. You'll see a good one every now and again. But I think overall, it's one of my favorite pieces. I was in it in 2006, and I really, really enjoy the show. We always say Tennessee Williams, no relation. But if that's something that you're interested in, they modernized it, which is I'm not a big fan of modernization, but it's still really, really good. And I think I meant to just watch for 5 minutes. I think I watched about 20 minutes, and then I was like, oh, I have to get back to work. But I'd highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah. All right. And Bristol, yes, we see you are there. We hope you can see us. We hope that we're still streaming out live. So should we get into talking about Hocus Pocus?
Okay, yes, now I'm done catching up. We should get into the brunt of the show.
All right. So Hocus Pocus, a little bit of background on Hocus Pocus. Like we said, it's a cult hit. A lot of folks our age and younger really remember this movie and hold on to it and kind of cherish it. It's 1994, 1993, somewhere around there. Movie from Disney.
Also directed by Kenny Ortega, who's directed Newsies, which I think was 1992, and also all the Descendants series, which I love.
And for people who are horror fans, which does not include Bri, the characters, the story of Hocus Pocus were created by, and he co-wrote the movie as well, Mick Garris, which I was talking with Bri a bit about Mick Garris before we started. Mick Garris is actually a horror professional, and he's kind of a deep cut. He's not, he doesn't have a name like Stephen King or Clive Barker where you've seen his stuff like in a very mainstream setting of, oh, I watched a Mick Garris movie last night or something like that. But Mick Garris started out directing behind-the-scenes documentaries. So he did like the little 8-minute making of that went on to like the VHS copy of The Goonies or something like that when you bought it. And he wrote The Fly 2 and Critters 2 and directed Critters 2, but his directorial debut was that he directed a feature-length children's horror film for the wonderful world of Disney called Fuzzbucket, which is about a kid who befriends an invisible monster. And then the year after he made Hocus Pocus, he wrote Hocus Pocus and executive produced it, he went on to start adapting Stephen King to television and then became like one of Stephen King's favorite directors. And since then, he's been here and there all over the horror industry. He was one of the masters of horror where they made a TV series out of these movies that they created just for television. And yeah, he's just one of those names that you see constantly, and he's one of the real workhorses of the industry. Which, this is a thing as well that I was talking with Bri earlier about. I feel like a lot of the things that people see in scary stories for kids, where they feel like, oh, that's kind of corny, oh, that's kind of cheesy, a lot of that is corrected when you have someone who actually makes horror for adults taking a stab at making horror for kids. Because when you've worked on scaring adults, you know what line is a line too far for scaring children. You know how to create a proper story that engages kids and keeps kids on the edge of their seat and everything like that without being too much of a nightmare inducer for kids.
Well, as somebody who is scared of everything and never liked horror or anything, I feel like the kids think of some pretty horrible things, some pretty bad things in their head, and some of my favorite stories has always been like, how do you defeat the monster or the dragon or, whatever, and how you have the tools within you on your own to do that. And I think like Hocus Pocus does a good job of that. I think Harry Potter does a good job of that, where it's not necessarily the case that you can't reach out to adults or trusting parents or whatever, but there are these things that I feel like kids are more resilient and know and fear more things than I think we give them credit for. And like you said, it's not that you want to introduce any new fears, but there has certainly been many an adult who has been kind of, I guess, appropriately scared that has then gone on as that is their inspiration to, be a great children's educator, a great children's entertainer. I think we just watched a thing with Christopher Lloyd where he said like his first scary movie inspired him to be an actor. Yeah. So.
And it is, but I feel like there's enough of a body of work that you can see with Mick Garris and Hocus Pocus. Neil Gaiman with Coraline and the Graveyard Book. He started out writing adult-oriented stories, including a lot of horror. Clive Barker and The Thief of Always. The more someone has worked in that industry for adults, the more capability they show with striking a chord with kids.
And I think, like, the big thing is it kind of goes into maybe more cartoonish stuff.
Yeah.
Because, spoilers for Hocus Pocus, they run over a cat with a bus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is a scene in the movie.
Yeah.
They don't show it. You know, they see the people in the bus bounce.
Yeah.
So, and that's a real thing that, you know, kids maybe had a cat or a dog that got run over. You know, how do you deal with that? They show the kids going through emotions of how sad that is. But it's dealt in a very cartoony way. Like, there's no blood, there's no guts. It's just, you know, the cat is a little deflated. Then he inflates back up and says, no, I'm cursed. I can't die.
Person, I can't die.
And so I feel like you're able to explore something very safely through that method versus, you know, if you happen to catch maybe an adult horror film where the blood and the gore and the theatricality is really a part of it, but that's not really appropriate for a smaller child.
Yeah. And it's like, well, you know, if you look at similar moment is the inciting incident in Pet Sematary. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely not written to be for kids to handle. But it's handled very well in Hocus Pocus. Mm-hmm. So the idea on Hocus Pocus is you start with a flashback to Salem.
Yes.
In which you find out that in Salem there were these 3 witches, the Sanderson sisters, played by Bette Midler, Kathy Najimy, and Sarah Jessica Parker. Who were essentially kidnapping and eating children.
Mm-hmm. And it's not like, it's, they give them a potion and they kind of suck out their life essence. So again, it's not horror.
It's shown as like energy being drawn off of the kids.
It's taking really scary concepts, but not feeding a child's fear.
Although there are lots of jokes made along the lines of like, you know, a kid kebab sort of thing. So you can joke about it, but there's nothing on screen that's seen about it.
Right. Yeah, and I think another big piece, like I'll say like one more thing to this trifecta of scary but okay for kids. They have a zombie. Yeah. But one of the things about the zombie is we all know zombies bite you and that's very scary. So the zombie shows up with their mouth sewed up. So I feel like that's even taking away some of the threat of what a little kid would say, oh, here's a zombie, he can kind of get me. But the one defining feature of biting you isn't there.
Yeah, that's Billy is the zombie, yeah.
And then, like, later on we find out when he tries to, you know, talk and breathe and open his mouth or whatever, he's not scary at all. He's just a dude.
Yeah. But, so the Sanderson sisters kidnap a young girl. The girl's brother follows them to their cottage and interrupts the ceremony where the witches are trying to feed off the girl's energy. With the result being that the witches curse him and turn him into a cat.
Yeah, and his sister does die.
His sister does wind up dying.
So that's another thing. Like, they don't hold punches on like reality of what's happening. Yeah. Like, not everybody's saved. But there's a kind of an interesting like afterlife and ghosts and stuff like that as well because it's a Halloween movie. Yeah,
which we then see. You know, speaking of, they don't pull any like punches on that sort of thing. We then see the townsfolk arresting the witches.
Yeah, to hang them by their neck until they're dead.
Yes. Which, you know, you get to see some dangling feet, which is... That's one of those things where I'm like, a horror professional knows you can get away with that for kids. Mm-hmm. Whereas somebody who hasn't worked in horror would probably be like, how dare you show that to children? But...
it's not, you know... Quentin Tarantino type of stuff. It's more or less like kind of the same thing like what you'd see in Wizard of Oz, like the feet underneath the house.
Yeah.
So.
But it is done, and honestly, that's one of the more accurate depictions of the way that witch executions were done in Salem, because you always see people doing the tie him to a stake and build a fire around him. That was European. In Salem, they built gallows. Yeah.
Haven't had a whole lot of, like, you know, dunking or anything.
No. Haven't seen a lot of that.
Except in Monty Python.
Yes. But, so then before the witches are hanged, Bette Midler's character, Winifred is Bette Midler. Winifred basically curses the town and tells them that they will return in 300 years when a virgin lights the black flame candle.
And I think that's another part of contention about the movie is, do little kids understand what a virgin is, and is that appropriate conversation? And I think if you're young enough, no, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
You just kind of know, like, okay, that's part of the movie. And I think if you are 13, 14, you're like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing.
So then we fast forward to the modern day, well, the 1993-94 modern day, where you have Max, who is played by Omri Katz. Not the biggest name in the world, but he was the kid from Erie, Indiana. And I think he also played John Larroquette's son in the John Larroquette Show. But he is playing Max in this movie, who is a kid who just moved to Salem with his family.
Yeah, from Los Angeles.
From Los Angeles. So he's undergoing a bit of culture shock. And we see that he's sitting in his classroom, in his high school classroom, with the teacher teaching the students the story of the Sanderson sisters.
And you kind of get a feeling like, yeah, it's a little bit of a baby thing to be teaching to a high school class, but because it's the main tourism part of the town, like, of course, like, you know, a teacher's going to take some time off and be like, ha ha ha, it's Halloween, you know. Yeah.
And we won't spend too long summarizing the plot. We want to get into, like, talking about what would go into a stage version. And, but basically, there's a girl in class he likes. He winds up having to take his little sister trick-or-treating. They go to the house where the girl he likes lives. She turns out to have, like, a mother who worked at a museum about the Sanderson sisters. And lo and behold, Max winds up bringing the Sanderson sisters back to life by lighting the black flame candle.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. And then the rest of the movie is the hijinks that ensue because of that. Yeah. And some of them are fairly famous. You know, Bette Midler sings I Put a Spell on You. Yeah. There's Gary and Penny Marshall in a really kind of silly scene.
Gary and Penny Marshall. I always think this is funny. Yeah. There was a period in the 80s and the 90s where people would cast Gary Marshall and Penny Marshall, who were father and daughter, as husband and wife. And that's how they cast them in Hocus Pocus as well.
There's a big Halloween dance party where the parents are kind of trapped for a little bit. But basically, like, the majority of the comedy comes from the Sanderson sisters not knowing all the technology of 300 years, so the kids get away with a lot by tricking them. There's also a lot of interaction with the boy who was cursed for when his sister died. He's now a cat. Yeah. And so there's a talking cat.
Named Binks.
So I feel like there's kind of like all these tropes that kind of make it really an endearing family film. It's just a little spooky.
Yeah, you have, as Bri talked about, at one point the witches raise a zombie to go after the kids. The zombie is Billy. And then when Billy
played by Doug Jones, who's great.
Yes, who is a horror professional. Yes. Has done a lot in that genre. He's the tall, skinny guy who plays lots of tall, skinny monsters.
And I love him in so many things. Like, as not a horror person, I've certainly seen him in enough things. One of my favorite TV shows right now that has just been renewed for a third season is The Things We Do in Shadows. Yes. I love the movie. I love the whole series. And he plays, like, the oldest vampire in the world on season 1, and he's great in that. I mean, it's just so funny that he's made such a wonderful career out of wearing bizarre prosthetics and being these ghoulish figures, and he just seems like he's like the sweetest, nicest guy.
But he, when he does actually like cut the threads that have sewed his mouth shut, you learn that he's actually like, he was one of the kids who was kidnapped by the witches. So he's actually not that thrilled by the witches. He's not really helping them out. He's more interested in, like, getting back at them, sort of thing.
And one of the tidbits I know about that scene, which I just think is phenomenal, is he held live moths in his mouth, because moths come out, and they said that wasn't CGI. They just said, just hold your mouth kind of open, and he spits out moths that fly away.
This was, most of the effects in the movie, this was
practical. Yeah,
this was the period right before computer effects became huge. Because I remember the big deal in this movie is that some of the shots of Binks, that they used a puppet, an animatronic, for Binks speaking, but they also used CGI to, like, sweeten the effect and make the puppet look more real. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of practical effects at use in this show. But so now thinking about turning this into a musical.
Well, first of all, that's why I think it's great to turn into a musical, because if they've already done practical effects for the movie, you know that's going to transfer well to the stage. Like, there's a bit where they raise Max up, and that's a very famous magician trick.
Yeah.
Stage productions have had flying forever, Peter Pan.
And you've got playing with the flying brooms in this movie. You have, very famously, the image of Kathy and Jimmy, after her broom gets stolen, riding a vacuum cleaner through the sky. So you've got options to play with there for, like, doing rigging to fly people on brooms.
And even Disney, like with especially their production of Frozen that just happened, had a lot of actors where you would see the actors, see their faces, but also see the puppet.
Yeah.
So I think if you were to even do that, that would be perfectly fine for Binks.
Yeah. But now, so here, let's talk a little bit about it. Some things that I would work on, some things that I would maybe change, maybe shift around, sort of thing. I think, first of all, I think it comes down to getting the Sanderson sisters right.
Yes, I have my dream casting. And I think we should have a little cast off.
Oh my. Okay. You know what? Give me your idea.
Okay. So here's who I would want for them. I would really love Sarah Jessica Parker. I know it could be played by Sarah Jessica Parker. You know, she's no slouch in the Broadway world. But I love Jane Krakowski. And I'd really love Jane Krakowski to be that character.
I could see that, yeah.
And then for Kathy and Jimmy's role, I'd really love Keala Settle.
All right.
Who played the bearded lady in Greatest Showman.
Okay.
She's a tremendous belter, can sing almost anything. I think she'd be great for that. And then I think Winifred should be played by Peppermint, who was in Head Over Heels as the Oracle. And so that's kind of like my dream casting of who I think the Sanderson sisters should be.
Now, see, I hadn't really given much thought to the casting of the characters, who I would be like, oh, let's throw this person and that person into it. So I don't know that I could come up with a competing cast right off the top of my head. But I can tell you, rewatching the film, the dynamic of the three that came to mind for me was the Three Stooges. Which, that's kind of cliche, you have these three characters playing off of each other. But honestly, literally, 90% of Kathy and Jimmy's performance in Hocus Pocus is Curly.
Yeah, I mean, it's really physical comedy, which I don't think you have a female-driven comedy piece like that, unless you think later it's maybe Bridesmaids.
Right.
But there really isn't a lot of, I think, mass comedy. And then when that does happen, like Ghostbusters, people are like, I hate it.
I think
I liked it. But
I think the casting can be very flexible on it. I think you do need someone who reads young to play Sarah, which is the sister that Sarah Jessica Parker plays. And I think you need someone who plays... You need someone who can be a Mo to be Winifred. And we had discussed before, you had discussed the idea of that being a drag role. That, like, you know, like Harvey Fierstein, if I got the right name there.
Yep,
Harvey Fierstein. Yeah, Harvey Fierstein, that sort of thing. Which I'm not opposed to that. I feel like you can be very flexible on Winifred. As long as...
Well, I think it should be a real drag queen, though. Yeah. I mean, like, I don't think it should be put any guy in a dress like they did for Mrs. Trunchbull and Matilda.
I think what I would say is, if you're going to cast a drag queen, cast a drag queen. If you want to cast a woman in that role, cast a woman in that role. Because I could see that role being played by Idina Menzel. I think would be really good in that role. I think that Bette Midler still performs.
She could do it.
I think that if she wanted to come back to the role, you would be an idiot to turn her down.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I'm always thinking of is, like, if you're going to go to Broadway, you got to go camp with it. You know, it's like you got to have that showgirl aesthetic. And they had a lot of that in the movie. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the movie was like, oh, that was so dull. But I do think that it's, like, almost like showgirl headpieces type of stuff, right?
but you need... I think the important thing on Winifred is having somebody who has that kind of dominant personality, but can also play, I am still totally incompetent. That, you know, like I said, being the Mo of the group. And it is a role where I would be like, yeah, I'd be totally fine with that being a drag queen role. Let's see. And like I said, Sarah Jessica Parker's role, you just need someone who reads young. Because she's supposed to be the younger and kind of foolish sister.
And that's the thing, too, about Broadway, is it's not necessarily a young casting.
Right.
I mean, it could be. Like, there's, like, Renee Rapp, who is just a college-age student and got out of Mean Girls and could very easily do it. But I feel like, you know, you could definitely have an older actress just as long as they were still... Like, the reason why I like Jane Krakowski, she still got those splits. Yeah. You know? And so I feel like as long as they were very physical, it would be okay.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's playing young.
Yeah.
They have to be able to portray young from the stage. They don't have to be young.
Right.
You know, as a very heavy man myself, I always appreciate the actors who have played, like, the Phantom of the Opera over the years, who had 44, 46, 48-inch waists. Mm-hmm. So, if you can play it, you can play it. Just play it. But I think for a lot of... I think you need a strong three-person ensemble. Mm-hmm. I think in the film you have Bette Midler actually pulls back a little bit in her performance to allow the other two to really have a place in the ensemble.
Well, I feel performing for film is always different than performing for the stage. Right. And things that do really well on the stage is not going to do really well on film, especially not in close-up.
But from a film perspective, Bette Midler at that time was a film star. Mm-hmm. She knew how to carry a film. Mm-hmm. She was not necessarily carrying Hocus Pocus. She was allowing other people space to breathe in the camera and things like that, which I think, moving on to the stage, I think you would want to focus more on the ensemble of the three. And you would want to focus on who the characters are, how they fit in the ensemble. So Bette Midler's character, like I said, she's the Mo. She's the one who's in charge. She's the one who wants everyone to know she's in charge. She's not a great witch, but she's in charge. I think, I have blanked on, this is why I have IMDb sitting right here. Mary, Kathy Najimy's character, Mary, is sort of the bulldog of the group. Like, literally, she's a bloodhound. She smells children to help lead them to the children they're going to get. So you need someone who can pull off that kind of, not to continually go to the Three Stooges as the model, but someone who can pull off that sort of curly aspect of very physical and very facial as well, of like, you know, yeah, I smell something. Sort of, you need that quality to that character. And then Sarah Sanderson is played as the sexy sister. Mm. You sort of get the image that she is the one who is responsible anytime they have to get like a teenage boy to come out to their cottage. She's the one who finds and brings the teenage boys for their spells, sort of thing. So I think that's, first and foremost, Sanderson sisters. This play is going to live or die based on the Sanderson sisters.
I also feel like the other thing about the youngest Sanderson sister, Sarah, is there's so many moments where she's the sacrificial one as well. Yes. Where it's like the other two sisters are like, all right, we're a team, but also like we're going to throw her in front of it and see if she lives first.
Which I've got to be honest, when I was thinking the Three Stooges, I was thinking, but that would make Sarah Larry. And I've never really thought of Larry as the sexy stooge. But he does fit the sort of sacrificial lamb profile that you're saying. Sort of the poor schmuck who's going to get shoved out in front of the bus sort of thing. Although, and I guess realistically speaking, comparatively, Larry is the sexy stooge. Because he's you're thinking about him relative to Mo and Curly, so... He seems like the guy who would be most likely to have a wife out of the three.
Well, and I just feel like if you've ever been part of a sibling dynamic, of course the youngest one is always going to be, eat it. Yeah. Eat it and see if it's okay. Yeah. Go do it. Mom, I told him not to do it.
And as the Riftones pointed out in their song about him, Larry's last name is Fine. So, But anyway, I think so. I think you've got to build that ensemble dynamic between the three Sanderson sisters, and I think they all three have their own individual characters. The sexy one, the bloodhound, the one in charge. But I think they all three have to be glammed up. It has to be absolute, like, Vegas diva. And you can start out a little bit subdued. Yeah, it can start out a little bit subdued in the costuming. But by the time they're getting to the party and everything, you should have sequins.
Well, I think a really good example is they have had them in the Disney parks over Halloween time. And I think that their performance costumes there are definitely different than the movie and are brighter, because if you go to a Disney park, it's really hard to see people all the way up on stage when you're like way far back. So I think that that's kind of the attitude you got to start with. You're right.
Yeah, and I think you could have a moment of, you could even work it in sort of the adjusting to the modern world. You could have a bit with them using their magic to be like, you know, we have to realize that in Salem we were it, we were glamour, and now the world has changed, so we need to change too.
So are you saying we need a Hey Mama, Welcome to the 60s number?
Yes, that is what I am saying. We need a Hey Mama, Welcome to the 60s number, yes. Absolutely. So yeah, you could, I think it would make a great musical number, sort of like the spell to make themselves more glamorous for the modern age. Especially if you do it as a period piece set in the early 90s. Coming out of Reagan, going into the Clinton years, sort of thing like that. Yeah, you would have that element of, like, people are walking around wearing neon as just, like, everyday clothing. We've got to spice it up a little bit if we're going to keep up with the times.
Well, the mom, she goes to Halloween party as Madonna, so...
Yes. She goes to wearing the, like, Truth or Dare bra. And so, yeah, so I feel like you have those settled down. I think Binks, I'm toying with a lot of ideas of how you would handle Binks. I do think Binks would be a cat puppet. I think the thing is, when you're dealing with something like a cat puppet, you can't rely on it as heavily as they rely on the cat in the movie. So my impulse is to increase the role of Billy. Let Billy get his voice a little bit earlier on. Let the kids see that Billy is on their side earlier on. And even potentially have Binks know who Billy is. You know, like Binks and Billy were friends when they were both alive, sort of thing. So that, in a way, you could do Billy going through this, taking a lot of the Binks sort of explanatory role, and Binks getting to be sort of this thing that's like perched on Billy's shoulder and like talking to the kids from there.
Well, you know, I think there's two different ways to do it, right? Yeah. So, you didn't see Treasure Island with me, but that's what they basically did, is they had an animatronic bird that would go along with Arthur Cavill and all that stuff. So, I mean, I think that that's totally possible. The technology's there. But, I mean, like, also, if you've seen Frozen, you know, they have an Olaf puppet. But an Olaf puppet, you still see the performer. So, I mean, you could still have maybe an arm or something dedicated to Cat, but you would also have the performer fully immersed as just there. Yeah.
I think the issue that I would have with that, not saying it's a bad idea, the issue I would have with that is that Frozen is much more a fairy tale universe. So I
disagree that Hocus Pocus is not a fairy tale.
Well, I think...
I mean, there's plenty of witches in fairy tales, Glenn.
Yes, but 1993 modern America...
So that wasn't a fairy tale. You had a horrible 1993. 2020 is so much better than 1993, Glenn.
All right. Yes, luring children into the woods to be eaten by a witch is a fairy tale, yes. But I'm just saying that
you don't want glossy princess commodity to it.
Right.
Gotcha.
I feel
I'm
like...
picking on you.
Yes, I feel like the magic, you're going to do magic centered more around the witches for the glamorous and glitzy magic. I'll tell you the other thing that I like about Billy and Binks being like a duo who follows the kids around, is that, spoiler alert, for a movie that was released, 27 years ago?
We're old.
27 years ago. 27. Yep, 27 years ago. Spoiler alert for a 27-year-old movie. At the end of the film, as they're defeating the witches for the final time, Binks gets thrown against a rock, and Binks, the kid who was cursed and turned into a cat who couldn't die, dies. But it's supposed to be alright because we see that Binks, as a ghost, is reunited with his sister. And they get to, like, walk off into the sunset after telling the kids who helped them goodbye and thank you for everything. I see, taking the Billy and Binks character, you don't have to do the death of the cat. You can do Billy and Binks, and then Billy at the end of the show, like, entrusting Binks to the kids. Or you could even do it as, these kids need some help, Binks, maybe you should go with them, sort of thing.
You just don't. I think that you're struggling with the thing that you have to have a toe tapping number at the end that the audience can go out bouncing and humming and wanting to go get an after dinner drink or something. So I think that that's a bit hard to end. Like on a movie, it's perfectly fine, but I think it's hard to end on a musical because that's not a big finale of the cat's dead.
Yes.
The cat's dead.
and as much as they give you images of, like, the rest of the town and how the rest of the town is dealing with the aftermath, I don't feel like any of those make a great finale either.
Yeah. Because, I mean, even, like, I will say, in a recent example, Hadestown does not end happy. And Hadestown does not end happy. But what I think they do to pick it up and end it happy is they reset and they say that they're going to start telling the story over again and maybe the story will turn out better if they retell it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the curse of that show, the curse of the gods, that they have to keep retelling the story over and over.
And here is another thought that I had, and these are all, like, just brainstorming ideas. I throw them out and Bree smacks them down. I was thinking...
volleyball player!
I was thinking of, you have the Billy and the Binks pair, like I was talking about, except instead of Billy and Binks, make Binks the zombie, and make the cat Binks' sister.
Oh.
So then you get to see the two of them essentially having been, like, cursed with this existence, and deciding that they're going to dedicate themselves to making certain the Sandersons never hurt anyone again.
Well,
which also, at the end again, the cat could go with the kids as, make certain my sister has the good life that she never got a chance to have, sort of thing.
Well, I also think that solves another problem of you don't have to keep putting the witches in old age and young age makeup.
Right.
Which is easier to do in a movie and harder to do on stage. Beetlejuice certainly had those problems of when, the characters were double cast in certain roles, where they had to have, like, a whole team of makeup professionals to turn Delia into Miss Argentina and then back again.
Yeah.
That was really hard because she had to be all painted blue in, like, 13 minutes.
Yes.
So it's like, it is possible to do these things, and there's certainly the talent and the resources on Broadway that if you wanted to. But, like, I mean, if you're looking at, let's look at it from a Disney marketing perspective. If I wanted to say Hocus Pocus on Broadway and then Hocus Pocus for community theaters and little kids and, junior and all that stuff, that does make things easier from theaters who might not have that resource and would worry about, they have to be old, they have to be young.
And Disney has made this sort of decision before with, say, adapting Aladdin, making the decision that instead of having Abu riding along on Aladdin's shoulder, let's bring in Aladdin's two friends to, like, be his foil, to be his comic foil, instead of having to find a way to have a monkey on stage for it. So I feel like it's a decision that kind of goes along in those lines. And I don't want to get rid of the cat at all because the cat is iconic. And I'm a cat person. I like cats. It's part of the reason I wanted to see this movie when I was 13 years old, was the cat. But I do feel like you can reserve the cat for important moments in the script and allow some of the more big moments and comic moments and things like that to be played by a human being who will also read better from the stage.
Well, I do think you have to kind of at least recognize that if you're going to have any type of cat on stage, they're going to be euphoricized.
Yes.
It's already going to be a bigger cat,
Yeah.
So there has to be kind of a reasoning for that. So having a curse or something makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And also maybe toying around with, I know black cats, which is Halloween sort of thing. Also toy around with making the cat something other than a black cat. As much as I love black cats, grew up with a black cat, it's black things do not read well from stage. You paint something black on stage when you want to hide it. So having the cat be a tricolor cat, something like that, might be advisable. But this, as far as I'm concerned, is for the puppetry designer. Write the cat. Let the production team decide what color the cat needs to be. But I do think that playing with expanding the Billy role and making Billy a foil to Binks is a more graceful solution, I guess, for a lot of moments in the story. And something that I would enjoy because I always liked the character of Billy. Mm-hmm. And Billy actually has very little of this movie to himself. Yeah. So, that's my thought.
Yeah. Okay, what next?
Okay, let's see.
What are some other big highlights? What is your elevator pitch?
Okay. Let's see. So, I think I Put a Spell on You has to be a musical number in the show. I don't think you can replace that song.
I bet Disney still owns the rights because it was Mark Shaman, another great musical writer. That was kind of his song. He made it for Bette Midler. He's kind of like the clincher or whatever. Mm-hmm. Whenever you need a diva song, you're going to call Mark Shaman and he will write it. So he wrote Kristen Chenoweth's one in Descendants. Mm-hmm. He wrote this one for Bette Midler. So. Yeah,
and it's a rewrite of a classic sort of like blues rock song that's been rewritten with new lyrics for Bette Midler to play off of being a witch in the modern age, So I think you've got to have that song. It's just too iconic and it's too associated with those characters.
Yeah, people won't come.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not going to have that as, like, every single taxi cab in New York playing.
Yes.
Like, what are you even doing with your life?
It's the television commercial song. When you make the television commercial of, come to the whatever theater to see Hocus Pocus, a musical romp for the whole family, you're going to have that song playing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that can be... I would put that, honestly, as a first act ender.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that, for sure.
So I think first act, I think I would actually... I think if I'm starting off the play, if I'm writing the script, my first thought is get rid of the scene in Salem at the beginning.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, let's open with the high school in the modern day.
Yep. And follow Max around. I mean, I think like that's pretty much the main character, right? Yeah. Is you want to follow that kid's journey.
Yes.
It's like Ralphie in A Christmas Story.
Yeah. And I think that, so you follow that kid's story, and there are a lot of great elements to that character. Mm-hmm. He's very much kind of like the surly teenage boy archetype.
He's really struggling, like, not being a little kid, not having to have responsibilities yet. Like, he doesn't want to take care of his sister because he's worried that that'll make him look like he's into baby things. Yeah. And he's having a hard time coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. And so that he's having a lot of that coming-of-age type of struggles.
Yeah. Although, at the same time, the movie doesn't hesitate to make clear he loves his sister. Mm-hmm. He's sick of doing things like taking her trick-or-treating. But, very early in the movie, he has a moment when he yells at her, but that isn't allowed to be their entire relationship. It's like the very next moment is them making up because they're brother and sister and they love each other.
Yeah, and I think another fun moment is when she said, I'll do any favor you want, but you have to dress up next year of what I want you to dress up as, and he agrees.
Yes.
You know, so it is a lovely, loving relationship. It's you know, I think it's mostly believable.
It's when she's like, I don't want to go out to the Sanderson house, and he's like, I'm trying to impress this girl. Let's, I'll do anything you want. And she's like, okay, next year we're going trick-or-treating as Wendy and Peter Pan, and you're wearing the tights.
Yep. And he pretty quickly says yes, like, because he's like, that's fair.
He has a moment of like, sure.
Yeah, because if he gets to date the girl will understand. He's very sweet and sensitive towards his sister.
Yes. She's already said it's very cute that he's taking his sister out trick-or-treating, so.
So I think, like, with cutting out the very first section, and then maybe it all being told through lore, builds a relationship between, Max and Danny, his little sister. It builds a relationship to their town. It kind of gives the musical number I always hate is like, welcome to our town, and this is our town. But it gives an opportunity for that, which would be really important for this type of piece.
And I think that, so I think that you begin with the school, you begin with the trick-or-treating. I'm 50-50 at this point on whether you keep the bully characters or not.
I'm feeling I like them enough, and I think that you could really use them well. I think what I would always struggle with is like you said, with more gendered representation. Yeah. So it's like if you have Binks and his sister Emily, that kind of evens it out instead of like, oh, here's all these dudes. But I mean, like, they're really kind of an important thing of like where a lot of the overall conflict is coming from, and sometimes you have to be really overt in conflict on the stage. You can't just have all emotional drama, otherwise it doesn't read as well. So, while it's all good for Max to say, oh, I don't fit in here, having a real physical example of that, and maybe it's just a guy, maybe it's not two guys, but I think that having some sort of antagonist aside from the witches also helps put things in perspective. Like, that's what's really strong about the end, is when they defeat the witches, they're like, well, who cares about the bullies? I can stand up to them. That's easy. Right.
Plus, they're left hanging in cages in the Sanderson house at the end. So, if nobody checks the Sanderson sisters' house for a while, the bullies aren't going to be a problem much longer.
And I can see that being like the reprise to Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. If you can see the bullies being lowered down from the stage in the cages.
You have the big, yay, we're going into the rest of our lives with our cat who's immortal sort of thing. And then you see the cages lowering down at the end of the big happy number. And it's just like, and just like in the credits, they could be sitting there singing, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream.
And then fade.
Yeah.
I think, I honestly, what is even all these flying rigs for if you're not going to do that?
I think, okay. So yeah, there's a good argument there for keeping the bullies in place, in which case I want to expand their role. So I think that we get them sort of like clowning around with the witches. In the movie, they, the witches wind up catching them. Essentially because, if I remember correctly, they're like making fun of the witches. Yes. And so the witches are like, oh, really?
Yes, they're like, you're just ugly old ladies. What do you want? And then they catch them and they're like, no, we meant you're cute young ladies.
Yes. Which I think you could play with the idea of essentially turning the bullies into henchmen for the witches for part of it.
Or I feel like the two things I kind of see is I was like, there's a lot of fun Me Too jokes to put in there. Like, I mean, like, let's just be honest, if we're going to talk about misogyny, it'd be really fun to kind of come up on that. But also I feel like they would have a bigger antagonizing part of why being a virgin is bad. Yeah. Because I think that that's not ever really explained in the movie. And not that you want to get into it in the movie, but I feel like there has been plenty of musical moments where it's like, Sandra Dee or stuff like that, where you make fun of people. You're not experienced. You're too naive. Like, it's just like, oh, who wants to be around you, weirdo?
Well, and I could even see, I could even see a moment there, that there's a moment when the Sanderson sisters are kind of like resigned to their fate, that, oh, we've lost the child, we're not going to be able. And that's around about the time that they get these two guys. I could even see a moment of you've turned them into sort of the henchmen who are running around with the witches. You could even do it as a mind control thing. So it could even be like Winifred enchants them to do whatever the witches want. And that's where you get the, actually, you're pretty young ladies. What were we talking about? So you could have a moment of them being like, of the witches being like very resigned and Winifred's very depressed. And Sarah just being like, well, we've got a backup over there. And all three witches turn and look at the guys who are just standing there. And Winifred's like, I'd rather starve, you know? Or something like that, yeah. So you can play with that. You can expand the role of the bullies a bit. So they're bullies who are picking on Max. And then when the Sanderson sisters sort of start their rampage through town, the bullies come in very early into that and are kind of their henchmen showing them around the town. I love Gary Marshall's role in this. As just a hapless guy who happens to be dressed for Halloween as the devil.
I feel like you could make him like the mayor of the town or
Yeah.
something. Like something pretty high up there so that he would just be in a devil suit the whole time.
He could be the mayor of the town who's like welcoming people to the party that the parents are at as well, where I Put a Spell on You happens. And you could even have a lot of the moments that happen in the house between Gary and Penny being done as like sort of on the outskirts of this party.
Well, yeah, I just think of like the role of like Mayor Shin in Music Man, or I think of like, you know, the preacher in Footloose. Like there's always that kind of like bumbling kind of adult character who just doesn't get it, but they're like, but young man, I know what you need. Oh, you just buck up, but this is a fun time of year.
So, and essentially what you're doing there is you're compressing. You have all these little bits that are great in the movie. It makes it very complicated to jump around and do them all on stage. So why not bring that character of the hapless sort of like guy who's...
Yeah, into the opening number, and then you said into the beginning of the party. So that you see these bits that were really effective on film translated throughout the whole course of the thing, because there's nothing worse than being an actor, not that I would know, and only having one scene, and it shows up in Act 2, and so you're just sitting backstage reading all during Act 1, and then after Act 2, you have to stick around for the bow, even though you had your one scene, and you want to go home, and you're really hungry, and you're really tired, and your feet hurt, and you're there all day, and you had to work before. Not that I would know.
But you can expand that role. You can come up with a reason that the mayor knows the family. For instance, Max's father could have moved there for work, essentially to like work in the city planner's office, or work as the tourism director for Salem.
That's what I always got the feeling of, is that his parents worked in the film industry, and now they're here to like beef up the town. Like, we're going to do a documentary about this. We're going to do an advertisement or something.
So he could be like he could be somebody who's now the new head of the Salem tourism department. And the mayor's really like, come on out for the party. You gotta, come on out. Be a member of the community. Don't just be the person we hired for this sort of thing.
Well, and I feel like it would give him a real good opportunity because Max doesn't wear a costume. So if he's in the devil costume, Max, am I a fool for dressing in a costume?
I think so. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, and I think it works really well to expand that role like that. Because it's a great comic role on its own, but you're allowed to have comic roles on their own in a movie. Like you said, if you do it on stage, you wind up with an actor who's sitting backstage the entire show, waiting for their chance to go on and be the gatekeeper or something. So I would expand that role. I would even consider making him as the mayor also being the girl's father that Max is interested in. So you could even play with that early on when I'm going to look up the names instead of going so and so sister, so and so.
Yes, you were just like, I'm so excited. I have IMDb here.
All right, Danny. Danny is Max's sister.
Yes.
Danny overhears Max talking about the girl he has a crush on, who is Allison. So Max, Danny, and Allison. So you could have the mayor of the town be Allison's father. Yeah. And absolutely. you could even have that moment of when Danny is like, oh, maybe we should ask Allison, of the mayor being like, wait, Allison? My Allison?
We watch a lot of the same things.
Yes.
So, okay, let's wrap this up. Because I think that we've been chatting. I think we got a good plan. I'd like to see this. Yeah. I mean, I think the only thing that's kind of stopping us right now, we should write this. Yes. We should write this down. But, like, what are some big takeaway things that you want to kind of express about this pitch, or things to remember, or kind of why do you think it would just be the next big thing on Broadway?
Okay, so I think the thing you've got to focus on here, the thing that to me makes the movie work, is that it's funny, yes, but it is a horror movie. Yes. So I think if you're going to take this on Broadway, for me, you've got to focus on the horror, and then let the glamour of the Sanderson sisters be the comedy element. So I think that this is a great story in terms of theme, that there's a lot of family and togetherness and everything, but there's also not letting your history determine who you are. That you can turn around, you can change your life, and you can undo wrongs that you have done. I feel like that's at the heart of Banks's character trajectory, is I failed once before, but I can make things right now. And I think those things are very important now. Telling people the importance of family and togetherness, and telling people it's not too late. You know, whenever you're like, I went down a wrong path, it's not too late to turn around and start over.
Yeah, I think for me, there's just not a lot of great holiday shows. Yeah. So, I mean, like, we've got some
Halloween
good ones.
shows in particular.
Yeah, like, we don't really have Halloween musicals. Horror musicals are normally reserved for off-Broadway, so I think if anybody's going to do it, Disney can do it. Yeah. I think that it's easily something that you could open up, you know, in August, and it could run very, very strongly ticket sales-wise into February. You know, even longer, depending, because I think there is a lot of nostalgia for our age group, and I do think that with the family-driven element of it, people are going to come see that it's family-friendly, kids will want to sit through it, it's exciting, it's Disney. Also, there's kids in it, like, there's kids and animals, and that always tends to do well, like Annie and Matilda. And
it's kids and animals, and it's kids done in a way that you very rarely see on Broadway, because you have kids who are at the center. But it's not a massive cast of kids like Matilda or Annie. But it's also not one or two kids, like Fun Home or something like that.
And I think, but to be fair, like, Fun Home, didn't they have, like, 7 kids playing all the roles and stuff like that? Same thing with, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
anyway.
But it tends to be you have a massive number of kids, or you have a very small number of kids.
We're going off the rails here. But basically, I think that if horror's going to come, it's going to come in a family-friendly package from Disney. I think that it's going to sell out that Halloween to Christmas season, when there really isn't a lot of things that are themed to that. Horror by itself or Christmas by itself hasn't really done well. I think anything with kids and animals tends to do fairly well as far as family-friendly fare. And then I also think that they had such a strong piece in I Put a Spell on You that it's already been translated to a Walt Disney World show. Yeah. That I do see that being the main driving factor, even if you didn't have anything else, and maybe with everything else that you're kind of changing around it, as long as you kept that, I think fans would be happy.
Yeah, and I think it can all work. I think it's definitely a show that can be brought to the stage. I think it's a show where, I don't know, I talked about if you're doing it as a 90s period piece, you could do it in the modern day and it wouldn't be that much of a problem.
Oh, and you get 3 fantastic, belting, amazing singers for the ladies, which a lot of times just the leading lady will sell a show, but if you got 3, hey.
Well, and also, I'm going to throw this out really quick in terms of thinking about themes and characters and everything like that. This is one of the few children's adventure movies that actually gives you an explanation as for where are the adults when all of this is going on. Which typically it's like, how neglectful are these parents? And what you see is, these parents aren't neglectful, it's just, they're supposed to be having a good time tonight at a party.
Well, it's a small town and it's Halloween.
And they think their kids are playing a prank on them because who would expect it to be real love? Oh, yes, I lit a candle and brought back 3 evil witches.
And on that note, that's Hocus Pocus the musical. It's been pitched. So great. Next week, just real quick, I'm going to be doing Teen Beach Movie 3.
Yes, 3.
And then you're going to be doing The Absent-Minded Professor. And we haven't kind of come up with what we're going to do, but since I'm going to be at home for a week, we'll figure it out.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us.
All right,
we love you.
Thank you, everybody. We love you. Take care of yourself out there because, you know, we're not there to take care of you, all right?
Yeah. And we'll have this up on YouTube soon.
Yes. Much sooner than the last ones have been.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a great weekend. Happy Memorial Day.